Recording in progress. Okay, well, first of all, thank you to everybody, but particularly to Beverly for getting people to respond, because that's the way teachers can never do that. It's only fellow students who can pull off that trick to get people to, and all of you weighed in. And what I hope is that you'll get answers from today's session and next week's last session regarding that, because to go from the theoretical to the actual practice is something that's not that easy to do, particularly in a Zoom class. But even if it was even if it was in person, the course would be designed so that there would be a certain amount of didactic material and the actual practice, and then the ability to evaluate. So a number of years ago, as we were developing in Nirav Shah, the Institute for Deep Ecumenism, the idea was to teach a series of courses over a 2-year period of time, leading to a certificate in whatever Deep Ecumenism, and then having over time developing a cadre of people who were not only conversant in the underpinnings of it, but also engaged in it, both Christians and Jews, or Muslims if possible, and Buddhists, and all spiritual traditions doing it, and then creating groups where one can strengthen each other through the process, because you always run into oopses, and you need the support of people, particularly when there's negative things going on in the world, and you, in your own practice of deep ecumenism with others, that you encounter stumbling blocks. So we're still working on that. It's quite possible that out of this cadre, some of you will say, I'm game, I'm going to do it. All right. And we'll discuss how later on. A couple of things that I would like to share with you that I hope will go towards, one, answering some of your observations and questions, and two, expanding the understanding of what deep ecumenism is all about. And I do want to make it clear that there's been not so much criticism as a wondering about whether using the term deep ecumenism is the most appropriate. Okay? And the first main reason is that it's not something that most people are aware of the term. It was coined by Matthew Fox and many years ago, and Reb Zalman is the other person who uses it, particularly because of his friendship with Matt Fox. And of course, Matt Fox is a controversial person in the theological world of Catholicism, particularly. And so, and you want to avoid using the word interfaith, because interfaith has a historical role to play, in that interfaith means like Methodists getting together and talking with Lutherans, or even the Catholic Church talking to Protestant churches, or the stuff that goes on between the Roman Catholic Church, the Western Church, and the Eastern Church, all right, or the Russian Church, what have you. Those kinds of, quote, dialogues are generally what is traditionally referred to as interfaith. Intrafaith is, and that would be like getting together and talking, let's say, leadership in Jewish renewal were to enter into a dialogue with Chabad and make it as difficult as I could make it. But that'd be interfaith, okay? So now I want to read you two paragraphs, not from Zalman, but from Reb Shai Eisenberg, Zichrono Livracha, when he was a respondent, and I didn't include, Chaz and Steve and I didn't include the entire responding to the sessions that Reb Zalman started, but these are two that are very, very important to understand the process. We're all in trouble if we stay restorationists. We're all in trouble if we try to keep it the way it was. The reality is that most practitioners of Judaism, in a collective or individual application of Judaism, are in one way or another restorations. Okay? They hang on to the stuff from the past. Now, I'm not saying that's negative in every case. You have to have some foundation, some basis to engage in spiritual practice. But when you think about, for example, what did Jewish renewal bring to the table early on, even before it had a name, right? Let's take one example, meditation, all right? Now, whether those who were practitioners of meditation in the early days were aware or not that meditation practices historically, if you read Aryeh Kaplan's books on Jewish meditation, will know that meditation has a long history. But for the most part, the early practitioners of spiritual searching in the 60s that became what we know as Jewish renewal got their meditation practices from the East. All right? And Zalman, in fact, promoted that as vitamins that we needed before he enunciated the principle that you can't get all your vitamins from one source. Okay? So Shaya goes on and he says, all our oughts need to extend. Our theology needs to transform. That our practices need to transform. The common recognition from tradition to tradition takes it out of triumphalism. So if you take your tradition and engage in a dialogue with somebody else about their tradition, which is the past, that's something different than just holding on as building a fence around your tradition so nothing else interferes with it. That's the story primarily of Orthodoxy, all right? Certainly of Haredi Judaism, okay?
What do you mean by triumphalism?
The triumphalism is the notion that my tradition, Judaism, is the only correct one.
Okay.
And you find that assertion in every tradition, including the Eastern traditions. Mm-hmm. All right? So that the whole structure of the religious tradition is such that in order to maintain its legitimacy in the minds and hearts of its adherents, they have to give off a kind of a superiority notion that it is the triumphal in the end, when all things come to an end, when the Mahdi occurs, when the Messiah arrives, whatever, one religion will be able to say, we were right. Okay?
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by triumphalism. Or what Shai also means by triumphalism. So
and that's
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And that's what Zalman addresses in that piece you gave us, our arrogance.
Yes, I mean, ultimately is arrogant to think such a way, but it is protection. All right. I was given that particularly when I was a teenager, in a city where I had to confront Christianity as the superior religion, being told all those traditional things about if I don't accept Jesus Christ, I'll go to hell, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So my rabbi presented a triumphalist notion of Judaism, that in the end, I will know that Judaism was always right. All right, that was my protection. And it was the protection for everybody else in the community because we were a minority among minorities in the community. So, so Shia goes on, it takes it out of competition. So if tradition meets tradition, it takes it out of competition and you're just exchanging what it is that is part of your tradition. All right. It can be ordered in such a way in the conversation, in the dialogue, so that you're presenting it as insights into how one sees reality or the afterlife or whatever it happens to be. All right. And you just share, well, this is how we see it. And it's not a dispute. It's not the medieval disputation style. It's sharing. The sharing expands the possibilities. So there's no competition. It's expanding it and deepening the understanding of what it's all about. That's why I did last week the thing about sin and repentance and everything, is I took, here they sit separately. And then I showed that really Christianity and Judaism are much closer on most of the issues of sin and repentance. All right? Their Lent period is equivalent to our Elul and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Okay? Reb Zalman used to say, it's a shame that the way that the calendars were constructed, that they didn't happen at the same time. Because then you would have this enormous Christian community in the world and the Jewish community in the world doing the tshuva stuff, the repair, the tikkun, whatever, all at the same time. Reb Zalman saying, just imagine the energy field that would be created rather than dissipated, because it's happening several times in the year. Then Shia goes on and he says, it takes us out of competition and puts us into the position of, okay, what do you know that I need to know? What do I know that you need to know? All right, that's the exchange of the vitamins. All right, we need to help each other in that way. Then Shia goes on and he says, so why did we need spiritual vitamins from other places? And here's the crucial question. Why did the Dalai Lama call on Jews to come and teach about how to live in Galut? So for those of you who read Jews in the Lotus, that's the experience. I strongly recommend that you read the book if you haven't. The Dalai Lama in exile with a good part of his community, wanting to know how you live in exile, how you raise the next generation, their children and everything, who are living in exile from their land. The Dalai Lama concluded that the Jews know it best, but he didn't know what they knew. So he put out feelers, and it was quite a crowd. Yitz Greenberg, Blue Greenberg, Reb Zalman, Moshe Waldox, Julie Levitt. I don't remember the whole crowd, but it was an amazing encounter. And one of the things that Zalman said to the Dalai Lama, he said, he explained Pesach. And then he said, you guys have to write a Haggadah of your own tradition, okay? Because part of the experience of Galut is the hope to return. And so the Haggadah contains the recitation of the expulsion or the slavery, what have you, and the hope of returning to one's original home. All right. I have no idea. I know that Blue Greenberg, because I talked to her about this, that she spent several years after the trip to Dharamsala working with the group in Dharamsala to create educational material that would work about how to live and how to maintain the traditions. Okay, so there you see the way that deep ecumenism really works. There are two wells working with the divine river. Best way to explain what happened there. Okay, he goes on and he says, because in the planetary situation, this is Shaya, in which we live, nobody can do it themselves. No one group can do it themselves. Nobody has all the answers. We need each other. We need each other for our own survival, and we need each other's proposals for the evolution of the planet. Okay? I am absolutely convinced that if our respective religions, spiritual traditions, East and West, get it together on the one issue that is the most important issue in the world today, and that is the whole issue of whatever you want to call it, climate change. Okay? The fact is, we will not survive as human beings in this world if we continue on the path. And while there is political will to a degree, there is also ill will towards the issue in the political sphere. But you can find, for example, in segments of the evangelical Christian world in the United States that strongly understand, really strongly understand the crisis of they have a Gaia consciousness. It's based in traditional, literal, biblical understanding of creation. But who cares? They see the issue from that perspective. And so that's another example of it. Let me stop at this point because I'm going to switch to something else. Questions, reflections so far?
So when you say they have a Gaia consciousness, I know what Gaia means, but what do you mean by that in relationship to what you said?
It's the understanding that we're not, first of all, we're not as human beings at the top of the pinnacle able to do it and given the right to do everything we want to the world we live in. All right. So it's a consciousness of inter-responsibility between peoples and nations and what have you. So that's one part of it. Another part of it is Gaia is the notion that the earth is a living organism, not just some static piece of rock, all right? And that it lives and breathes like everything else in God's creation. And therefore, we have to be cognizant of the fact that consciousness is that we're just a part of the whole thing. And as we breathe in and we breathe out, so the trees, for example, and all this stuff is interrelated. And there is a closer notion of oneness than multiplicities on this. So that's what Gaia consciousness really is all about.
So did Reb Zalman do any work with Joanne Macy?
Oh, yes, big time. And in fact, thank you for mentioning that. Just to let you know, Joanne Macy coined the term deep ecology.
Hmm.
Right.
And she did that when she was teaching at Matt Fox's Creation Spirituality Center in Oakland, California. And Matt said, deep ecumenism and deep ecology. That's how the term, excuse me, that's how the term came about. And so, and Joanne Macy taught for a number of years at Matt's place in Oakland. And the fact is that you read her stuff, and she comes from the application of Buddhist spiritual tradition applied on a universal scale, but understandable here in the United States. All right, and you don't have to you don't have to be a Buddhist to get her. All right, she's profound. Yeah. Excuse me, Stippy. I don't know. You go ahead, Stippy.
I was remembering today as I was studying all this, Rian Eisler and her whole idea of partnership. I was wondering if Reb Zalman also brought her, because that's what we're talking about here. We're really talking about partnership and being able to learn to live together.
Yeah. I don't immediately recall hearing Reb Zalman reference, but I can tell you that in the last number of years of Reb Zalman's life, I never heard him give a teaching that he didn't conclude with tears his deep concern about Gaia. All right. I mean, he knew he wasn't going to live to see a possible solution to the issue, that it was long term, but he fretted deeply the challenge that we face regarding the earth. And, I once semi-seriously said, there are people, because the notion of Gaia goes back to, I think, the 20s or 30s. And I said, not everybody accepts the notion of Gaia. And Zalman got really pissy about it. He says, I don't care. It's real. This is not a rock that we're living on, is the way he put it. And he said, and anybody who looks at it differently is aiding and abetting the future destruction of this planet. So
Thank you.
now let me see if I can pull it up, because now what I want to do is, let's see, yes. Okay, share. Now, back in the day, around 2015, I forget for how many years, when Naji and I were the project directors of Allah, so we were promoting programs through Allah that particularly reflected Reb Zalman's vision, along with other things, but Ruach Haaretz was part of Allah, deep ecumenism, aging to saging, all those things, Shefa, we all brought that, Nadia and I brought them into Aleph and made them an umbrella programmatics of Aleph. So when it came time to promoting in programs and sharing, particularly in deep ecumenism, the first two postings to everybody in Aleph were from Hazen Steve Klepper, who described in great detail the work that he and the Franciscan brother Al, have been doing for years. Then Nadia and I asked Pastor Larry Daniels Block, who died just about a month and a half ago, who was part of the team, Pastor Linda and Pastor Larry, were the pastors who we engaged in 2003 on in deep ecumenism with the church here in Boulder. And when they left and took up a position in St. Louis, that was the impetus for us to establish a monthly deep ecumenism Zoom gathering with a small group of people from different faiths to explore our interconnectedness. So this, in response to the questions that you asked, I thought that it would be important to hear, put it this way, from the other side, how it works, not from my promotion, but from somebody else's promotion and receptivity to what was going on. Okay? So, this is 2016. Oh no, it was 2015 when he wrote it. This year, the Jewish and Christian calendars bring Jewish Passover and the Christian Holy Week into convergence. Rabbi Nadia and Rabbi Victor Gross asked if I would write an article about this convergence. In building and repairing our relationship in the interfaith struggle, looking for commonality, for connections, for similar typologies, as well as divergence, diversity, and the holy other, we find that we are led often and hopefully to a mutual understanding and connectedness. For me, deep ecumenism builds and leads us beyond the necessary task of sharing our understanding of our traditions, our belief system, and our doctrines. Using our culture of words, we increase in understanding, but it is possible to go beyond the world and the events of words. Or is it possible to go beyond the world and the events of words? The aha event, when we comprehend the other, their spirituality, their context, is often a word event, whereby through our sharing of understanding, explanations, i.e. our culture of words, our minds come into focus. Can deep ecumenism lead us through these word events into a vision event? My lifelong search for deeper meaning in human understanding, and particularly in language, beyond the surface and literal meanings, made me open to the introduction of deep ecumenism that Rabbis Nadia and Rabbi Victor led me into as it existed, not simply as an idea or method, but as was personified in them and in Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi. They were kindred spirits. It was as if I had known them before I existed. Deep ecumenism, let me tell you its story. In the Christian Gospels, the Pharisees are often the antagonists of Jesus. In the cultural context of Jesus, that would probably not have stood out. But over time, and as Jewish and Christian cultures separated, the word Pharisee became, I think, in an unconscious way, a synonym for opposition to Jesus. As such, its use projected meaning that enforced anti-Jewish sentiment, even though it may have been subconscious. Now the story. Sometime before Pastor Linda and I met Rabbis Nadia and Victor, and we began sharing sacred space, I had one of those weird dreams. No action, no weird people or places, just a voice. A clear, authoritative, firm voice that one doesn't even begin to question. The voice said, "You will no longer use the term Pharisee in the reading of the scriptures in worship." That was it, the dream. I woke thinking, now what? What was that about? But I began to do as I was told. What should I use in place of Pharisees? Well, not knowing a lot, I went with what I had. I thought Pharisees were very religious. They had obviously spent significant time thinking upon the Holy Scriptures. They were learned. I also knew they questioned Jesus about both his words and deeds. Quite frankly, I thought pastors, of course. I, as a pastor, was pretty much like that. So I went with it. I did narrow it somewhat by saying a group of Lutheran pastors came to Jesus. Not long after this dream, Rabbi Nadia and Rabbi Victor appeared, and our congregation began sharing sacred space. But even more importantly, a journey into deep ecumenism. I use this dream story not as teaching or content, but because to me, it reminded me that the language of our stories may create roadblocks to our relationship with folks of various faith traditions. Our Lenten journey as Christians begins 40 days before our Holy Week. Palm Sunday begins with Jesus entering Jerusalem, his final week. On Monday to Thursday, he gathers his close disciples and followers, including spouses and children, in an upper room to celebrate Passover. The convergence of Jewish Passover with Christian Holy Week happens because of the different calendars. Easter Sunday is the first Sunday after the first full moon after the vernal equinox. But Passover, because of its integral symbolic and religious connections to Maundy Thursday, is in the Christian tradition not movable. It doesn't follow the Jewish calendar. If Easter was determined in this way, our Passover is always on Monday, Thursday. In other words, it was integral to the institution of the Lord's Last Supper. That takes us into the night. The story of Passover, the Exodus remembrance, forms the spiritual nest for the spirituality of our Holy Communion. We gather on that night as the Passover begins, as did the disciples. The Lenten journey of repentance, acknowledging our complicity in the brokenness of this world and its people, our sins against God, humanity, and the earth itself, has led us to this room. In fear and doubt, in pain and recognition, we gather hoping that a new journey into new life will begin. Jesus takes the bread and breaks it. The Exodus story and its symbolic meaning is present. The oppression, the suffering, our pleas for help and mercy from the Holy One, our longing for spiritual and mental, physical freedom, the plagues, the emperor, Pharaoh, the angel of death, the blood of the Lamb, the firstborn saved or condemned. The disciples are there as Jesus takes the bread. They wait in fear. We wait in fear and in doubt. The Exodus, the parting of the Red Sea to open a way of new life, manna, bread in the wilderness. Satan had tempted Jesus in the wilderness with bread. Jesus multiplied the bread to the thousands, the bread of life, the sustenance of life, the bread of Passover. And Jesus broke it, a bond of sharing bread, a sign of a bond with one another with the source of all life, which cannot be overcome, neither through sin nor even death itself. In the bread and in the wine, a communion takes place with the Holy One. For us, a Holy Communion. Out of the story of the mighty acts of God in the Exodus comes our Christian central spiritual act, Holy Communion. But in the communion, we go beyond the words, the meaning, the language of our culture, into the presence. Notice, in the above attempt to share with you the nature of spirituality of the Christian practice of communion and its convergence with Passover, I was limited to the world and its culture of language, words with meaning, words emoting, words that cause pain, but words that can help find commonality, understanding, respect, and even new meaning. Different religions and traditions, in coming together to explore our cultures of words, may find a path to work together. This is essential work of any interfaith growth and understanding. This is the surface of ecumenism where we meet. Our words, language, can overcome much of our misunderstandings. So for me, deep ecumenism is when we go beyond the word events into the vision event. For me as a Christian, as long as our communion is embedded and constrained in the culture of language, in words, it remains subject to language and meaning, can only be provided by proper understanding. Such is the case in Christianity, where Holy Communion becomes one of the primary sectarian dividing forces for us. Communion has been used to bind membership practices. It has been used to determine who is saved and who is condemned. It has been used to cast out as in excommunication. It has been used to control the grace of God. It has been used to restrict and restrain God's presence. All because Holy Communion has become a mere word event. Deep ecumenism helps us to deconstruct our bondage to words and word events. And the conversation we have in this process creates a vision, takes us into deeper levels of understanding and meaning. Our vision is reflected in our practice. In our Lutheran liturgy, we sing about foretaste of a feast to come as part of our communion liturgy. Through the act of Holy Communion, we participate now in the world to come when God's reign is realized. We often commune, gathering in a half circle, symbolizing that we join all who have gone before and all who are yet to come, all the saints of God, all who have lived and died and are yet to be born, all people. We sing of victory when we have been and being oppressed by the forces of this world will rise and be vindicated. Even the earth itself will be repaired. It's a vision of the realization of God's plan for all of creation. As our holy days this year converge, I hope there is a new convergence of spirit as we follow the light through the darkness into the newness we long for. Blessings, Larry Block, pastor. So what I'd like you to do is take a few minutes to reflect on what you've heard. Jot down some notes if you need, and we'll share what you got. For most of you, not all of you, for most of you, from somebody from the other side, or some of you from the same side. All right? But this is a Lutheran pastor talking to a Jewish audience. Okay? I'll give you some time. And I'll mail this out to you, or email this piece. Anybody want to start? Well, others are.
Yeah, I was interested in what he said about communion, uh, because he didn't spell it out, but I think the idea is that there are certain rituals uh, that you may be eligible or ineligible to participate in, and the drawing of that line is drawing a line of inclusion and exclusion. That's my understanding of it. I was wondering, I mean, there's always the question of who's in and who's out. The quote "who is a Jew" question is has been debated to death. Really, I just saw something else online about that, which I will listen to in due course. Uh, but I don't know if there are any rituals in Judaism like that. I mean, you think Aliyah, but at least in halachic Judaism, that's already limited to post-bar mitzvah men. Uh, uh, but the notion of having a ritual like that, I don't know what to say about it. I mean, he isn't saying do away with the eligibility requirements, but he is saying that it can be the effects of them can be negative. And how do you keep them from getting negative while at the same time saying that belonging to our communion means something?
Right, because, and you nailed it. And very briefly to say that, yes, there is an eligibility, inclusive, exclusive aspect to communion. And at this particular Shepherd of the Hills church that we've been in relationship since 2003, at the announcement when it comes time to do the communion ritual, the pastors recite this formula, which makes it very clear that it is an open table. So it's inclusive, not exclusive. But on the other side of the issue, when we went with the Interfaith pilgrimage, which was something that we ran back in 2015 through Aleph, and we had Lutherans primarily, but from different synods. And when it came time on Sunday, when Linda and Larry were doing the service, it came time for communion, they explained that it was an open table, that all could participate in communion. And the people from the Missouri Synod, which is a very conservative Lutheran synod, said, we cannot partake in your communion. If we had had Catholics, they wouldn't have participated in the communion also. So in that sense, there is an exclusion and inclusion aspect in Christianity depending on the denomination. On eligibility, it's a different matter. In most, as I understand, in most of the denominations of Christianity, in both the Catholic and in the Protestant world, baptism is a requirement to take communion, all right? So you can be baptized at any stage in your life. I mean, I witnessed through the years at the church, I witnessed on Sunday mornings when Nadia and I would go, babies being baptized, but also adults who had not been baptized at a certain point in my life. So great, I'm glad you brought that up. Other reflections on what Pastor Larry of blessed memory offered?
There was something about words and spiritual experiences, that words can't match a spiritual experience of unity with each other and with with whatever. But I wanted to say something about eating.
Hold on with the next thought, okay, Tiffy, because I just want to point out, I'm not sure if Larry got this from his encounters with Reb Zalman or not, or his own reflection on the Christian experience in words. But Zalman put it in his language as theology is the afterthought of a spiritual experience. In other words, words are used to describe an experience. Therefore, they're limiting in all sorts of ways. I just wanted to say that. So I hope you remember where you're going. Go ahead, Sissy.
Yeah, well, no, and I agree that I think words are limited. I was going to go back to the communion and Passover and keeping Passover. In other words, however anybody does it, but we're encouraged to eat matzah. And all the blessings that we say over food, I mean, all of those can be spiritual experiences. I see it when I eat with my Christian friends, and they sit there and they say the blessings. I mean, the energy is just incredible. I don't always feel it when I say my blessings, but I'm working on it. But
right on. I mean, you nailed it, because when you eat a meal, so we say a blessing both before and after. And Christians do the same. And whenever we would get together with Linda and Larry for a meal, or the current pastor, Janet, and her husband, Pastor, who's also a pastor, before we eat, we hold hands, and when Linda and Larry were around, Linda is the most amazing blesser. I mean, she just brings it down, and it's powerful. And yes, we Jews who learn blessings recite them by rote without the kavanah. That's why when you look at the Lurianic Siddur, every blessing, every prayer has a kavanah that you recite.
Mazeh kavanah.
No, what is the intentionality of uttering that blessing? So you ground yourself, you bring yourself into the proper space for the utterance of the prayer. When the Baal Shem Tov began his work, the Baal Shem Tov took out, because the service in the Lurianic tradition lasted forever, because every prayer had a kavanah. Some of them were very long, some of them weren't. But he reduced the kavanot, but he still kept the concept of it. And if those of you who have looked at Reb Marsha Prager's Siddur, the first page, when you open it, it starts out, which I started our first session, behold, I am about to engage or participate in the positive mitzvah of Ve'ahavta l'reach kamocha, to love my fellow whoever as I love myself. That's a kavanah. All right? So before you pray, you set yourself. And if you do the Seder right, each one of those steps is consumption.
Mm-hmm.
All right? And so you set yourself, because there are mystical and Hasidic Haggadot that give a kavanah for each of those consumption parts of the Seder. I mean, you got the chalosich, you got the karpas, you got the wine, you got the matzah. There's a lot of consuming there. All right. And so when you understand that, and I mean, a lot of what Larry, I mean, you picked up too, a lot of what Pastor Larry was saying is shorthand for experiences that he engaged in and learned to engage in. The whole aspect of him, okay, I got to don't use the word Pharisee, but you got a text and the time of the year for Christian liturgy that is most focused on the Pharisees is unfortunately Good Friday. So you got to deal with that. So I mean, he wrestled with it. I mean, he talked at length to us over time about how he wrestled with always wanting to get rid of it and then having that dream that said, stop it. Don't use that word again. So he came up with it and he worked the liturgy on Good Friday in the church so that he didn't want to give a long lecture to the church people on Good Friday, why he was changing it. He wanted them to experience it. And that was the way he was playing with trying to deal with words. And when we were on the pilgrimage with them, when we did the Stations of the Cross in the Old City in Jerusalem, he did the explanation and the reading from the gospel at each stage of the cross. And it was always big on what he called recontextualizing. And for him, recontextualizing was a look at the words that are out of the gospel, out of the tradition of the Catholic tradition into the Lutheran period and all that, and recontextualizing it so it reflected a greater, I call it, humanistic approach to spirit, all right? And it was a wonderful experience. Okay, I want to pick up other reflections on what Pastor Larry wrote. Because he said things beyond the communion was a centerpiece because of the linkage between Passover and because of the convergence of that particular year, 2015. But there was more to it, right? Yeah, Beverly, please. Excuse me.
Well, I didn't ponder too much on the communion. I was kind of focused on the whole concept that words matter and how much words matter. And so my reflections went more like Jews and Christians, probably Muslims, I know less about them, understood that creation came about by the word of God. And I like to call it the real Big Bang theory. And God spoke, and bang, it was. Seen on a t-shirt once. But the point of it is that we're really focused on words, and that words can bring together. Words are not always as precise as we would like, especially when we're talking about a spiritual experience. They're not quite adequate, really, frequently. And now I have to ponder how words divide, because we see it just in our daily life, in our politics. And I'd never quite thought of it exactly that way before. So I need to do more pondering on that.
Great,
Thank
Beverly.
you.
Because I can tell you that as a Jew, the first time I heard the words of the communion, this is the body of Christ.
Mhm.
This is the blood of Christ. I reacted in a totally negative way. Okay. And then when Nadja and I went, because we had it set up that every Tuesday we would download and study text together, we said, we get that Luther brought about an enormous revolution in Christianity, that the Reformation was a reformulation. The liturgy changed. The meaning behind much of the liturgy changed. But looking at the text of communion, the Lutherans are still using exactly the same language as the Roman Catholic Church. Their response was, the Catholic Church, now this is coming from a Lutheran pastor, the Catholic Church takes that language, the blood and the body of Christ, literally. Luther saw it as emblematic, as a symbol. Okay? So I remember my react, okay, that's good. But why not change the language? The words are problematic. All right? And because what Reb Zalman said in 1998, Jay will remember this, he said in that teaching that you people have, most of it, that, and he was talking to rabbis, even though Jay was there and other people were there, said, you have to be able to come to take communion as a rabbi. Well, that challenge kept butting up against the body and the blood. Those two words in what, watching the ritual, watching the people, had a profound effect on us. But when we asked the pastors, are these people taking part in a symbolic thing or a literal thing? And he said, most likely literal. Okay?
Right.
Yeah.
I will just briefly share this. It just came to my mind. I did speak before. I grew up in a Jewish section of Worcester. My very first job in high school part-time was at a Jewish home for the aged. So I worked 3 to 11 as an aide. And I remember a rabbi coming and doing the Shabbat Friday evening, lighting candles. And I was so surprised at how totally similar it was what my Protestant church did once a month on Communion Sunday. I'll just leave it there. I had never in my life known where it came from. Ultimately, really. Just a memory.
What? It's a powerful memory because
it is for me a powerful memory. Yes.
Yes, and there are so many things that you see when you watch what's going on. That's why I sent you that thing from Richard Rohr about looking and listening, because looking is not something that is emphasized in Judaism, particularly out of the worry about making graven images. That's why it took a long time for the Jewish people to really engage in art. The Renaissance is an exception because in Italy, the Jewish community started, beautiful Haggadot, Ketubot, all right? And then it dissipated after the Renaissance period. And there wasn't art until the late 19th and then into the 20th century. So we weren't a looking people, we were a listening. That's Shema, all right? And in the Torah, to listen is repeated over and over again. You don't see, there are a couple occasions where they use the word look, like with tzitzis. If you look upon them, you will obey all the mitzvot. Okay? But in general, so Rohr, as a good Franciscan, learned that St. Francis was a looker. I don't know how else to put it. He was a looker All right, that's how he discovered nature. All right, so, Michael, yeah. So,
Okay, well, I'd rather comment on what I heard, but I can first, if it's okay, read what I wrote.
yes,
So,
please.
so I was kind of looking at it as a whole unit, not picking out little pieces. And what I wrote, and a little of it's redundant, is from understanding of different traditions, we can not just understand, but walk in the light that we all are connected by our actions of service under the grace of the universe. And so that's what I got out of Pastor Larry's
Well, if
message.
you will do, we'll take a break shortly. If you'll put that what you wrote, if you can do it fast enough in the chat, because that's really beautiful. And
Oh, thank
Barbara,
you. Oh, I wanted to comment on what I heard. So, although part of my adult life I always considered myself uh, Jewish, I wasn't very observant, but I always considered. But under different situations, I have been in plenty of Catholic churches, and I have taken communion as an idea, whether if it was for a memorial service to honor the family of the deceased or to honor the memory of the person who had passed. And you can see I took communion and I'm still here. And also in my early yoga days at ashrams and all, I sat at the foot of a guru, but always considered myself a Jew. And also, and not that long ago, in my Buddhist life, I have taken refuge and sort of bowed to a spiritual leader. And in the Minyan I belong to, for the last 18 years, we prostrate ourselves during the high holidays. And I don't know if any of you people do that, but we do that. We prostrate ourselves. And to me, they're all the same thing. They're all in honor of something that's greater than me, in some universal source that I want to honor. And whether I'm a Jew or any other faith or path, I feel I can still, as my mother told me when I was decorating neighbors' Christmas trees, that you're a Jew and that's your identity, and be proud of that, and just remember that's who you are.
great, thank you. Lots of traveling you did, and still do. And Barbara, please. Then we'll take a short break.
Yeah, I was quite taken during the reflection time in focusing on going beyond word events to vision events. And I took that in a more spiritual sense of moving beyond the rote, the somewhat mechanized procedures that we can get caught up in, that I got caught up in my younger times, and how different it was when we had our first Interfaith Thanksgiving event. It was at an ELCA Lutheran church, and I was involved in the coordination of all aspects of the event, and I was finally able to go into the sanctuary, and when it had already started. And at that moment, the Jewish cantor was singing, and the words that he was singing were on the screens on the church, where the Lutheran prayers and hymns normally were posted in English, and of course this was in Hebrew. And his deep, resonant voice spoke to me. I didn't understand the words in Hebrew, of course, but the words and the spirit of that message touched me so deeply. I literally, physically took a shiver. It was so profound, and that has never happened to me before. And that this could, and it was the experience itself, but then in the larger context, that this could happen in a Lutheran church, in the church that at the time that I always went to, that it opened the possibility of going beyond the words and the spirit that we could all share. And in the years since then, of having visited so many different faith centers, and even being, as a layperson, being invited to pray or to read at both Reform and conservative synagogues and other faith centers as well, and experiencing the spirituality that we can share has just been profound. And that is my hope of the work that I'm engaged in, and I hope that others can promote as well, of how we can come together as people of faith, regardless of what the particulars of that faith may be, but the spirituality, that river that we all share and are attempting to reach.
Woo, so well stated, because the particulars don't come out in the rituals. All right, the words may hint at the particulars, but the actual, that's why I find communion, and I really say great that the Christians came up with communion, because it is a centerpiece of power of ritual with a minimum amount of words. The words, I mean, the way I hear it all the time from the pastors is that this is all explanation. Now we're going to experience, all right? And it ends with getting 2 lines or whatever it is, and then it becomes quiet, and people enter into the spiritual experience. And it's one of the things that you know, the Amida, I'll just conclude with this and take a break. The Amida, known by the rabbis in the Talmud as Hatfilah, the prayer, in some prayer books, it's referred to as the silent Amida or the silent devotion. The important thing is to use the silence. Most Jews use the words. They do the recitation of the words. But this is an opportunity, after all sorts of words going on for so long in the service, to experience silence, to open up the auditory pores of your body and receive that way in the sensation. Okay, enough of preaching. Getting in the high outing. Let's take a break to just before 20 after, or the 4 on your clock. Okay, there we go. And I just want to share with you Where to go? Right. And share. This was a talk that Reb Zalman gave, part of which appeared in the Journal of Ecumenical Studies and republished in Paradigm Shift. So one of the things that's always good with seminal teaching is to see different times that the teachings were presented and see, because of the years that it was offered and everything, that it was developed and changed and everything. So look down near the end of the first page. Dialogue is arbitration or disputation. Okay?
Yes, can't see it clearly.
Yeah, I can't make it any better, unfortunately. Even I can send you out the whole thing, because there's a whole series of documents from different people that I put together in a PDF, and I didn't realize when I did that the sizing of they're all different. I'll see if I can do better on this when I send it out. There is a myth begotten by marketplace and parliament that the individuals involved in dialogue will have power given to them to change the thinking of the faithful of their own community. The Jewish community has given me no such power. If I go too far out, I'll be repudiated by my own community. The dialoguer who goes too far afield is discredited. And with this, the effectiveness of dialogue as a changer of consciousness is undermined. Dialogue is not even part of seminary curricula, with the notable exception of Hebrew Union College of Cincinnati. There are no chairs in Christianity and Islam in Jewish seminaries. I suspect that the same is true of Christian and Muslim seminaries, and still there is tension between us. But in conference such as this one, we become the instrument of the power that wants us to connect, the power that I believe is at the core of the urge for dialogue. Now, when he wrote that, it was true. There are seminaries. You take, for example, one of the most liberal seminaries that have students from all faiths, including Jews. Jews I've known who have gone through to get their D-Mins is ILIF in Denver. And they train people to be ministers in Africa and everything like that. Some of the money comes from the Methodists, but they are very independent. Their professor of the Gospels is Jewish and very identified Jewish, a real scholar. Just like Amy Jill Levine, for all the years that she taught, she taught Christianity and that period of history, and she taught about the New Testament. So the dialogue is a different matter. All right, that there are seminaries now, Christian seminaries, not a lot, but it really started back in the early 60s when Heschel was appointed to teach at Union Theological Seminary in New York. They had to change the articles of incorporation of the institution because they discovered, after they announced that he would be teaching a course, that the rules of Union Theological Seminary, which is truly a great institution, that only Christians could teach. So they had to change the articles of incorporation. Okay, so that given, let's look. Thank God we're not in disputation. We may look to a discussion in which all partners are equal, open to each other and caring for the truth, each responding from the position of loyal adherent to his or her own religion, standing in the presence of the God who witnesses this sharing. As Malachi, it said, then do those who respect God speak each other to his fellow, and the Lord hearkened, listened, and wrote it all into his book entitled, The Dialogue of Those Who Fear the Lord and Honor His Name. So that was the thing that I chose at the top of my introduction to the deep ecumenism piece that you have, because there's an expression in Judaism that comes out of the Talmud, Elu ve'elu, these and those, divrei Elohim. These and those are the words of divrei Elohim Hayim, of the living God. So to hear the profundities from different spiritual traditions and share them, that's why Matt's book on deep ecumenism that I suggested in the very first session is so important, because it's all the words of the living God coming out of the different spiritual traditions. They're all equal and on the various topics. I am aware that I'm treading on pious toes, but please watch. I also stepped on my own. What I am saying is not that the world's faith to which we belong, have no factual basis at all. What I'm saying is that we are all on shaky ground, and that we need to deal not so much with the external facts, but with our own acts of faith. These we need to take seriously, because we stake our lives on them and invest them with supreme value. These acts of faith are not the result of facts. On the contrary, facts in this world are more often the result of acts of faith on which we base our actions. Our acts of faith create realities for us and others, so that we do not become arrogant in the process of inflating our truth claims that are based on our own acts of faith and put down those of others. I must make these statements so that in a sober and humble fashion, we may talk about our traditions without undue triumphalism. So there's a notion of superiority when you express your act of faith that can come through and kind of shut off the dialogue, because it's no longer talking among equals. There is this sense of triumphalism. And in gatherings, in early gatherings of attempts to engage in dialogue, many times this triumphalism, this superiority of one's own faith, because it is my faith. It propels me in life. It surrounds me in life, becomes an expression that I will not let anything. I put up borders, is the best way to put it. I put up fences. You may not intrude. Do not question my faith.
Right.
But that's not what the dialogue is all about.
No.
Right? It's what Zalman said in his stylistic fashion, is when you talk to somebody, you ask them how they get it on with God. You're interested in other ways. You're interested in the person you're talking to, that their faith is being expressed, right? It's like Zalman saying in that text that you have, when you stand next to a person who is looking at the cross, you have to find a way to appreciate and, as best as possible, understand what he or she is experiencing in looking at the cross. It's got to stop this nonsense of a rejection. I can't, because in Judaism, we're not supposed to look at the cross. You can go astray if you do. That's where we have to change our approach to the other traditions. I mean, there are things that have happened in Jewish renewal circles where we are using somebody else's spiritual retreat center. And I remember one particular one where we were having Ruach HaAretz at a Hindu retreat center. And we went in to do our Shabbos davening Friday night, and there on the bima was all the shrine objects. And some of the people came up to Nadia and me and said, this is really problematic. Well, I must say, it really bothers me to hear that. All right, in the renewal circle. All right, we're not praying to them. Maybe some of the Hindus in the crowd were, but we're not praying to them. And why give offense? And by the way, that's double entendre. Why give offense? Why have offense? When you can appreciate that. I must say that in our sanctuary, we have a baptismal font, and the water is always circulating. And the congregants have over the years said, you know, when we sit in silence during the Amida time, hearing that water come down the little spout into where it was kind of the little pool is so wonderful. It really aids our quiet. So now, the major impediment to communication among our three religions is the dogmatic stance that we assume for the sake of the propagation of faith. We quote authorities who knew more truly than we know, but whose energetic assertions snow us. The energy is the result of worldviews so dominated by their inner scene that they did not permit any of the doubts that are brought on by reality maps that do not match their dogma. Against the refrain, it ain't necessarily so, we bluff others who are not of our faith, and we bluff our own people, not deliberately as con artists, but out of desperation at the lack of hard evidence, and we bluff ourselves as a strategy against our own fickleness, our crooked heart, as Jeremiah calls it. Then again, acts of faith are not made on an empty heart. We have within our soul the most reliable teacher. As we watch the process in which the soul becomes thought or speech, we notice that many a time we ease ourselves into a convenient cliche that have little or new insight in them. Once more, we're trapped by habits that are the dunghill upon which the creeds feed. It takes vigilance and humble courage to make acts of faith. After all, where faith is weak, there is an abundance of beliefs. With this in mind, we may be more humble about our traditions and our sureness, yet also a little bit more proud of the holy process in our inner being that keeps teaching and guiding us. I got to unpack that. That's a lot. All right? It's when we experience the other, we naturally, on the part of so many, want to protect our beliefs. We don't want them challenged. We don't know in a sense of uncertainty. whether we're going to be challenged in our faith. And so what happens when doubt enters is that people retreat. In all religions, people retreat in the world of doubt into beliefs, the simple assertions of this I believe, and remove themselves from an abiding faith. And that closes off the ability to encounter others. All right? It's that need to protect it. And it manifests itself in physical ways too. Think about it. Why do Jews prefer to live in their own ghetto? Particularly, take the Orthodox in cities. I remember living in Los Angeles when there was two areas that were Orthodox geographically, but one of them was very small. So the rabbi's wife of the Orthodox synagogue was a realtor, and she began selling homes to Orthodox Jews on the other side of the city, where it was heavily Jewish, to come and populate so that they would feel insular. All right?
Yeah.
And that is, they could build their eruv so they could carry their tallis and all these things going on. But the desire to protect themselves from foreign influences. Right? Yes, Ruth, go ahead.
I think that's a factor in some cases, and maybe in some more insular, there are more insular Orthodox groups, but I think there's also like practical reasons why Orthodox Jews want to live within walking distance from a synagogue. They want to have enough people living there so that the synagogue can be sustained. They want to be able to have an eruv that you need, there are practical reasons to have for many people that aren't just
Yes.
being away from the others. Yeah.
Yes. So you combine both of them.
Yeah.
The practical, which I'm glad you did it, because I made it too strong a case for the other aspect, but there is that need. I mean, when the Orthodox community developed here in Boulder a number of years ago, the location was problematic in Boulder because the Orthodox Jews lived all over the city. All right, there is no Jewish neighborhood in Boulder. And so the issue was, could they build an eruv? So all the rabbis, the Reform, the Conservative, the three renewal rabbis, we all went to the city council meeting with Reb Zalman and argued to the secular council that we supported the establishment of an eruv. And Reb Zalman did the most amazing presentation when he got them to understand that the council would not hesitate doing those things on the street corner to make it possible for wheelchairs, disabled people to move along. He said, well, what we got is a group of disabled Jews. It was, and we rabbis were listening to Zalman, we just cracked up laughing, and it was back. Zalman turned around and looked at us kind of like, shush, right? He's making his case. And when he sat down, I was sitting next to him. I leaned over and I said, that was brilliant, Reb Zalman. And he said, got to know your audience. And so we got the eruv. It was approved. And so it was so wonderful because now the Orthodox Jews going to shul on Shabbos could wheel the baby carriages, carry their talesim, and not have to wear them. It was wonderful. So, and yet, on the other hand, there are so many remnants in our DNA. And it's not just being Jewish, it's also among Christians and Muslims and everything, is that need to be together, but it also is a cloistered atmosphere. In Christianity, it certainly is. So that's one of the things that is this for the dogmatic stance we assume for the sake of the propagation of faith. When you, I mean, we liberal rabbis felt really good that while we are not Orthodox Jews, that we could support an aspect of Orthodox living that did not impinge upon anything of our viewpoint. Our dogma, all right, didn't exist in this area to support an Eru, even though we didn't need it. All right. So in a way, this was one of the big interfaith activities of the Jewish, well, on the part of the rabbi of Boulder. All right. And it was not lost on the Orthodox rabbi. And the Orthodox rabbi who was an Eruv expert who came from New York told us afterwards when we were talking with him, he said, I've never experienced it. I go around to communities all over the United States and Canada to help them build an Eruv, and I've never experienced reform and conservative and what are you? Oh, renewal. Supporting an Orthodox initiative. All right. And so we talked about it's a sense of community, but it's also the fact that the Boulder Jewish community is heavily invested in the Shambhala Center and Naropa. This is a Blue Jew city. All right. So we're used to engagement with the other, just not much with Christianity until Nadja and I began to do our work here. So the last part that I want to deal with, the challenge of the new millennium. Besides the challenge of past history, we also face a challenge of the present millennium. This era is empirical, experiential, humanistic, multi-optional, fluid, mystical. It is existential, integrative, ecumenical, aware of nonverbal dimensions, with a view of God that is radically immanent, while at the same time utterly transcendental, non-anthropomorphic, and apopathic. Instead of being particularistic in regard to salvation and conditions that make for it, it is universalistic and non-institutional, heuristic and empirical. That's quite a bit. I mean, it's both past and emerging present future of what is going on. So the fact is that none of the religions, including the Eastern traditions, are at the present time in the 21st century static, absolutely static. Look at the Catholic Church now. There is the very strong conservative element in the Vatican and among the American bishops, but there is a pope that is trying to dramatically bring the church into the 21st century in alignment with other spiritual traditions. And the tug of war is incredible. I keep saying to my Christian friends that I just hope the Pope has a taster of the food, because there is such a strong pushback, right? And in cultural change, which religion is a part of, there is this dramatic pushing from both sides. There's a reason why Roe versus Wade failed under a dominant conservative court. There is this whole transgender issue. It is because the cultural changes that are going on now freak out the more conservative elements of culture in America, the holders of that culture, and Who would have thought 50 years ago that we would be engaged in a war against women once again? All right? I mean, it's unbelievable, the experience, because it's not only about abortion, it's not only about transgender issues, it's about men feeling they've lost the power that they had for, well, since Adam blamed Eve for the problem they had. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
No, we're just saying white men.
Well, no, it's white men in this. Well, it's not exclusively white men. In the Latino culture that I was exposed to in Los Angeles for over 20 years, there is a male dominance in their culture, very strong. All right. And I can name other cultures because Los Angeles at that time, when I lived there, became what New York was at the turn of the 20th century. And got every community in the world represented there in communities. And there is male dominance and there is freedom. But yes, it is safe to say that there is a white male dominant or feeling, I put it in a different way, that they've lost their power and they want it back.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's true or not, they want it back. All right, it's their perceived power. And
yeah.
So, okay, let me pick up. It demands to see the fruits in better and more harmonious relationships and to see a consciousness that is higher, more integrated with the physical, multidimensional, centered, and ecologically aware. The new humanism, wedded to transpersonal psychology, has challenged all of us by presenting a viable and deeply religious option to the biblical religions. So give me that old-time religion, which is based on the Bible, no longer is the only possibility. All right? And actually in Christendom, they've had several periods since the 19th century in the United States, for example, and in Central and South America, of the expression of liberation theology. I mean, Zalman got it, Martin Luther King got it from Howard Thurman. He was the teacher of a new form of liberation theology that had to do with race. The 1890s, 1880s, 1890s liberation theology was very much about other issues. And in Central America, particularly right now, and in parts of South America, liberation theology is running counter to the oppression that workers and the ecological environmental efforts that are going down there. There's a pushback from the conservative elements of the Catholic Church down there, but there are Catholic bishops that are pushing in the other direction. So, and one of the things, I mean, I tried to elicit from Reb Zalman, who was glorifying in these changes that were taking place, the more humanistic liberation stuff, the more openness to non-discriminatory laws and perspectives of going on. He so celebrated it that when I issued warnings to him that there was going to be a conservative pushback, he would basically ignore the warnings. And thank God he didn't live long enough to see how bad it has gotten, because he would decry this, what's going on. So, where is he? Week 3 can meet the challenge of psychology, most significantly in the field of spiritual direction, Tariqa, Musar, and Kabbalah. About these things, we must talk with one another from real life experience, not only from books. So one of the areas that I strongly recommend people explore is that spiritual direction to experience non-Jewish spiritual directors. Okay? And the spiritual internet, what they called, the big kind of phone book of spiritual directors in the United States grows every year. It's getting to look like a Manhattan phone book of the old days. There are so many. And the trainings are very different, but they're all ultimately the same kind. And it was Zalman who, and Reb Ber Jacobson Zal, who brought that stuff to the Jewish world, first to Jewish renewal, and then it is spread into the conservative reform movements and on and on and on. Once we realize the shakiness of the factual fundamentals of our acts of faith and come to a tentative agreement that the biblical and Quranic notions of holiness are not too far apart, then we realize that the holier we become, the stronger the impression our acts of faith make on the universe. But where do we learn how to fulfill the command, holy ye shall be, for holy am I, the Lord your God? We search the source of our tradition and find an entire literature devoted to spiritual direction. We read about the holy souls and the paths they took on their way to holiness, the anecdotes in which their lives and conversation taught more than what one can learn in the academy, the counsels they gave to seekers, and their day-to-day, breath-by-breath witness. So I want to strongly recommend that you search out the relatively short books on the Christian mystics written by Matt Fox. They're the most accessible to anybody, not convoluted, beyond understanding. And what's wonderful about the Christian mystics is that so many of them were women. And so what you're getting is both masculine and feminine mysticism, to use worn out terms. But the universalism, for those of us who have studied Hasidism and Kabbalah, it is refreshing to learn Christian mysticism. It really is. And of the males, I really find Meister Eckhart incredible. And the many Christian ones. And Matt has done an amazing job of making it accessible to people. So that's one of the ways, because if you want to really understand deep ecumenism, you have to understand the mystical trends. You really have to sense that beyond the ritual, beyond the dogma, beyond the catechism, beyond all those things lies a unifying principle, all right, of seeking and experiencing. Not all exclusively experienced, because there is thought involved, there is observation involved. So all that stuff is truly wonderful. And it should be part of your kind of lexicon so that you can engage with the other. And most Christians, it's amazing, they're not aware of the Christian mysticism. All right? Aquinas isn't as important to most Christians as Augustine is. And Augustine did a lot of damage to Christianity. But Aquinas had a very different path, more open, more ecumenical path. So I'm going to stop at this point. Any final reflections from anybody? And next week's our last class.
Um,
We'll come Yeah, go ahead.
I have a great reference for a book of Buddhist nuns.
Ah,
Written, it's quite good. I can send.
send it to me and I'll send it out.
Okay,
Okay? And I'm still working on the bibliography. You will all get it. My bibliography. Okay? So
Yeah.
don't forget to do your LO work. All right? And
Oh, and one more thing.
yep,
I started reading Jesus and the Disinherited.
yes,
It's incredible, and it makes so much more sense now than it did when I originally read it. So
yes.
thank
It's a great piece. When I discovered it, I said, "Holy moly! It was written in the late '40s."
yeah, it's amazing. He is revered in the community I just moved from, Howard Thurman.
Yep.
Just quite a guy.
Good,
I-
because
no.
he deserved. I mean, people are starting to pick up on him once again, because his message is profound, and the fact that he, was the primary intellectual and spiritual influence on Martin Luther King Jr. and on Reb Zalman makes us, hey, he's a compatriot of ours. All right. And the fact that he was black and teaching this stuff and doing this stuff when it still was restrictive in America makes it even stronger of a preaching to us. The message comes across in doesn't matter of time. Okay, see you all next week.
Okay.
Be
Hey,
well.
Victor,
Thank
Victor,
you.
Victor, can you hang on
Yeah.
a minute? I want to ask you a question about
Sure.
Yerusha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's kind of private.
Okay.
Okay, so Yerusha, it's about the term mystic. And what I saw on one of the emails from Yerusha in advertising a course, that they advertise the teacher, Mary Rita, as a Jewish mystic. And I'd like to know how she gets, what that means, and how she gets that qualification.
Well, I mean, from what I know of Mary Rita, I've known her for a couple of years, is that her study, her practice, she has gotten it because of her practice of ecumenism, because of her life from being a Catholic nun into being very Jewish, that she found, besides the practical stuff, the ritual change, the ceremonial change, all those changes in her life over time, that she found the more unifying principle in the mystical world. And so she has spent most of the time that I know of reading the mystics and coming to understand that that's the grounding that makes her located where she needs to be located in life. And I've always found it interesting that she goes to two shuls. One's a Reconstruction synagogue, and the other one is Mark Novak's, what's called Moshe.
Oh, okay. Well, since I got you, one other quick question.
Yeah.
I go to Reconstructionist Minyan. There's 3 Minyans at my Germantown Jewish Center, and conservative, traditional, which I like, modern Orthodox, and the Reconstructionist.
Right.
I have been to, not recently, to Panay or Philadelphia, when Masha was actively leading. Do renewal prostrate themselves during the high holidays?
I can't speak for every congregation,
Of
but
course.
I know many of them do. And the reality is that, especially on the Mizrahi Jewish practice, prostration was always done. And it certainly was done during temple times. And it became bowing during what I call the Protestantization period in the Enlightenment. And in our congregation, we do prostration on the high holidays, and we have on occasion, on a Shabbat morning over the years, prostrated ourselves at the Boruchu so that they know that that's what was really done, not bend the knee and bow, but prostrate themselves. All right. And people, Jews, don't consider that a legitimate practice because they associate it with Christians. All right.
Okay.
That's all I can say about it. And you know, it's outside of, I hope the rugs have been cleaned.
Right.
I find it a very powerful experience.
So do I.
Yeah.
So do I.
And our congregants do too. I mean, when we started, that's what we did, and they appreciate it. And on the holidays, they spread out all over the place so that they can do it. And with a smaller crowd, it's no big deal on Shabbos to do it. So,
Okay. Okay. By the way, I put that in the chat that you asked.
oh, thank you. Okay,
It's in the
because then the chat's saved, and I can.
Okay. Oh, you saved the chat? Okay,
Oh,
thank
yeah.
you. I feel
All right.
honored. Take care. Good night.
Goodbye. Take care.